good afternoon, everyone. And for those of you who've joined us, welcome to this live audience with Judi Zebedee, amazing solo round the world cyclist. I'm delighted to have Judi join me in this live interview to talk about primarily this amazing solo cycle journey around the world. But because it's such an inspiring story, I'm always fascinated to hear the backstory behind some of these amazing adventures. And just to put this into context, I haven't known Judi very long, and I got to know her because she became a co-pilot in another amazing journey across Siberia with one of my old school friends, Chris Blakey. And the story of how Judi came to be part of that journey across Siberia was covered in the interview that we had last week, where Judi was also joined by Will Leith to talk about the part of the journey from Lake Baikal to Tokyo. So I came across Judi by complete accident. I'd never heard of Judi before. I've never heard even of a solo woman cyclist. So I'm fascinated to find out how this journey came about and what kind of person would have the courage and the tenacity to want to ride a bike around the globe. Judi, just tell me a little bit about yourself. Where were you born?
I was born on Guernsey in the Channel Islands a couple of years ago, and lived there until I went to university at 17, almost 18. I went to university in Exeter. So I had a wonderful childhood growing up in Guernsey, but it was fairly safe and secure. We used to travel each year to France on holiday, and I absolutely loved just being abroad and trying out the foreign languages. But I think I always had an inkling somewhere to see the wider world.
Okay, so you went to Exeter and you studied Russian. What was it that gave you the inclination to study Russian?
Well, I love languages, and at school I'd done French and German, as you did in those days. And then during my lunch hours and after school, I was lucky enough to be able to study a little bit of Russian. And I just thought, well, everyone else is doing French and Spanish, so I'm going to do something different. And I love the Russian literature, and I love the idea of a country I'd never been to before. And so as part of that 4-year degree, I was lucky enough to spend my 3rd year in Soviet Union, as it was then. So I went out in 1990, spent 6 months in Moscow, and then 6 months in Yaroslavl, which is the city that's twinned with Exeter. And I must say that during that time, I didn't actually spend an awful lot of time studying. I spent most of it na ulici, as they say, so out on the streets, just getting out traveling. So I went up to Murmansk, I went down to Dushanbe, I went to Vilnius and Tallinn. And right at the end of my trip, everybody else had gone home, and I'd hung on there for a couple more months to go to a big parachute meet. And I had a couple of weeks spare, so I just nipped down to the Yaroslavl station, bought myself a ticket, and went to Vladivostok. And I think that's what gave me the taste for, getting out there and seeing the world.
That's quite an adventure. Did I hear you use the word parachute?
Yeah. I went to university and I joined 2 societies. One was the Ballroom Dancing Society, and one was the skydiving club. And I ended up doing nearly 400 parachute jumps. I never did learn the cha-cha-cha. So.
Well, that's an amazing combination: ballroom dancing and skydiving. I've never heard of it. Again, what possessed you to do skydiving? Had you done anything in Guernsey beforehand, or did you just?
No, there wasn't really much. There wasn't much opportunity in Guernsey, to be honest, for skydiving. It's a bit of a small island. They have occasionally had visiting clubs jump there, but there's not a lot of room for error. But yeah, it was just something I thought I'd do, and as with so many things that I take up, I got completely obsessed with it. To the point where I worked parachute club for the first few years, and actually I finally did jump into Guernsey on my wedding day. My husband and I parachuted after the service. We went up to the airport in a beautiful old Lagonda and jumped into the wedding reception.
Wow. Well, nobody can accuse you of being not being adventurous. Were there many universities actually offering Russian courses in those days, Judi? Why Exeter?
Yes. Yeah, there were a few. I think my other choice would have been Durham, because I wanted to go up somewhere further north. But Exeter had a fantastic course, a fantastic department at the time, and the advantage of being a very short flight from Guernsey. So that made life easier all round. But Exeter was just a wonderful place to study. I love the campus and the proximity to the moors and the coast. And yeah, it was a great choice.
So tell me about your first parachute jump, because I've done a couple of parachute jumps. I will never do another one, but tell me about your first parachute jump.
The first one I did, it was actually, we trained in the October, but being British weather as it normally is at that time of year, I didn't do my first jump until the 5th of November 1988. I remember it well. And it was the days of static line, round parachute. So you jumped out and the parachute opened for you. You couldn't really steer a great deal, but the moment I landed, I just dashed back and went, I want to go again, I want to go again. And that was it. My obsession with it was there. I was hooked.
Oh, wow. So did you go up in a small aircraft, just a very tiny one?
Yeah, we had a Cessna 206 at the time, which took 5 jumpers.
Right.
But over the years, I jumped in various different aircraft, or from aircraft, and I jumped from hot air balloon. And then in the time I was out in Russia, I was lucky enough to go to the very first Moscow Boogie, which is the name they call a big parachute meet. And it was extraordinary because they were basically jumping with kit that they'd looked in a magazine and made up their own parachutes, because things were going to square parachutes in those days. And so they were intrigued by mine, which wasn't particularly modern by our standards, but they could copy a parachute and knock one up overnight. And it was the most extraordinary time out there. And I jumped in Yaroslavl as well. So we jumped from massive helicopters where there were like 30 of us going out at the same time, doing handstands off the end of the tailgate. And I jumped from an Antonov biplane. It was an extraordinary time.
So I've done a couple of parachute jumps. I just share very quickly my own experience, because it's not about me, this is about you, but I think it's worth sharing. I got conned into doing a parachute jump by one of my friends. And so a number of us went along, and as you, like yourself, we were using a static line, and we jumped at a place called Lange near Nottingham. And you had to go and have a weekend course before you did the jump to go through all of the procedures and any kind of safety. And the whole day, from memory, seemed to be spent telling you everything that could go wrong and what to do if it did go wrong. And the one thing that stuck in my mind was the instructor saying, if you jump out of the plane and the static line doesn't release from the plane, so you're dangling along behind in the slipstream, he said, look up at the plane and give a thumbs up to show that you are still conscious. He said, and the instructor will show you a knife, and you've got to give him a thumbs up when he shows you the knife, and then he'll cut through the static line. And as you fall away, you open up your reserve chute. He said, if you're unconscious or you don't get any response, the instructor will slide down the static line onto your shoulders, and he'll wrap his legs around you, and he will cut through the line. And as you fall away, he said he will open your reserve chute and you'll be okay. And I tell you, I was not looking forward to going back the next day, and it wasn't really helped that we went to Lange the next day, and while we were waiting to go up in our turn, there were 2 girls who'd come back from the previous week. Because the weather hadn't been good enough for them to jump. So they went up first while we were stood on the airfield just watching and observing. And the first girl jumped out all right. And then the second girl panicked a bit, and she wrapped her arms around the wing strut. And then the pilot just shook the plane about until she fell off. And she landed in a field about half a mile away. And this first girl, when she landed, she obviously hadn't remembered her, knees bent routine, and she landed basically in a sitting position with her legs straight out on her bottom, and her head went straight back with a crash helmet and knocked herself out. And so we were due to go up very shortly after that, and I tell you, it was not that encouraging. So now moving fast forward, what did you do when you left university? What kind of career did you have?
Well, when I left my first degree, I went off interrailing for a month with a friend and came back 3 years later. So I got a bit hooked on the whole travel thing. We ended up, the friend from university and I travelled for 9 months together, and my then boyfriend came out to join us and her sister came out to join her, and we went our separate ways and travelled in our pairs. And my husband-to-be, and I worked in Australia for a year. We backpacked through Southeast Asia, went to New Zealand, Fiji, and ended up in Central America, where we decided it was time to come home, otherwise we completely ran out of money. So got back in 1995, and I worked in a nursing home for a while as a healthcare assistant, and decided that I really needed something more with my life, and ended up going to train as a physiotherapist, which is slightly at a tangent from Russian, but it was something that particularly fascinated me. I loved anatomy and physiology and the idea of motivating people. So I qualified from Cardiff in 1999 and went to work as a physio in Taunton. And I'd been working there a couple of years when my husband sadly passed away. And I decided then that it was time to get on the move again and to just do something different. So I volunteered for VSO and went out and spent 2 years in Tanzania working as a physio there. And it was when I came back from Tanzania that my group of friends who I used to go to the pub with had decided they were all becoming a bit middle-aged and a bit overweight. So rather than just walk down to the pub, they decided they'd get bikes and they'd cycle. And so I joined them. I bought myself an old hybrid bike, and we used to go off cycling to different pubs all around the Blackdown Hills, around the Devon and Somerset border area. And over the years, we ended up visiting more than 70 different pubs, I think. But gradually, as time went on, they sort of dropped out, and I got quite hooked on my cycling. And I was going out every weekend, doing a big circuit around the hills, coming home again. And then one day I was literally cycling along in the May sunshine, and I thought, why don't I just do one big circle and just keep going until I get back again? And that's where the idea for my cycle trip was born.
Right. Okay. So yes, I can see how a love of cycling, but the your love of cycling again was partly fueled, it seems to me, by your love of a glass of beer in a pub.
Yes, very much so.
But what was the attraction of possibly visiting foreign pubs or looking at the culture overseas as well? Or was it just?
It was bit of a combination, really. At the time I had 2 young nieces. I've now got 3, but at the time I had 2, and I always thought, I'd like to do something to inspire them, because I haven't got kids of my own, but I wanted to inspire my nieces and make them think that they could do anything they wanted in life. And I was never ever going to be fit enough to climb Everest or trek to the South Pole or anything like that, but I just thought, cycling is something I could do, and it would be quite an amazing trip, and it would be something for them to remember, and a few bragging rights for their friends, something to tell their teacher. And that was kind of where the idea came from. And I didn't really have a plan of where I was going to go and what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to go to China and to Chile, 2 countries I'd never been to before.
Right. Okay. So you needed to go around the world to effectively be able to accomplish both of those goals. So did you get any sponsorship of any kind, or what kind of preparation did you do before the trip?
Well, preparation was interesting because 4 months before I was due to leave, I skidded on the ice while out walking and broke my ankle. So I spent 6 weeks hopping around on one leg, and I didn't come out of plaster until the mid-February, and I was due to leave in the April. So there wasn't a great deal of training, to be honest. In fact, there was absolutely none at all. And I'd never done, until the day I left, which was the 29th of April 2010, I had never cycled anywhere with panniers on my bike. So I don't think prepared is exactly the term I'd use, but I'm a great believer in give it a go, just get out there and see. And that's why I decided to head east, because I thought at least I'll be going through countries to start with, like France and Germany, where I speak the language and I can sort out any technical problems, work out the kit and things. And so literally the day I left, I hadn't even thought to get maps. I had to tear the bottom of my road atlas off so I could find the way to Portsmouth. And then we got to France and I had to go to the nearest bar tabac to buy a map. So yeah, planning's not my forte, should we say.
Well, I could see that. But what about sponsorship? Did you think about sponsorship? Or
I decided not to do sponsorship because I felt I was doing this completely low tech. I didn't carry a computer. I didn't have a smartphone. I had a little Nokia brick that only sent text when you press every button 3 times. So I just thought if I was away out of contact for 2 years, it'd be really difficult to sustain that sort of level of interest. I mean, it's very different now when people are blogging and sending home videos every day and there's constant contact. So I thought, no, I wasn't going to do it sponsored. I was just going to get on my bike and go and do it for myself and, you know, to inspire others at a later point.
Well, this is the whole point of this series of interviews with extraordinary people. Is the aim is to inspire the younger generation, and you know, by the time you got to travelling abroad, you probably fitted in 2 or 3 lifetimes from the average person in your activities. So coming to the start of the journey, you've done next to no preparation, hadn't even got any maps, you got no sponsorship, and the only plan that you've got was to cycle east to get to Europe, where you spoke the languages, and then you're going to play it by ear from there. So you apart from wanting to go to China and Chile, there was no real idea of where you would go from each point. Is that right?
No, that's right. No, I literally, I took a world map with me, I think. I'm not even sure I had that, to be honest. But I was heading for, my sort of rough plan was to head towards the Black Sea. And then I wanted to go around through the Crimea and then down towards Georgia. But the Russians had other ideas. You couldn't apply for your visas in advance because you didn't know how long it was going to take you to get to that point.
Right.
And most of the visas start from the day you get them. So they would have expired by the time I got there. So I headed across Europe, through Eastern Europe. The weather was atrocious. It rained every day. So I just thought, let's get out of here as fast as I can. I can always come back to Europe another time. And then I ended up down in Odessa. I went through Moldova and down to Odessa on the Black Sea. And it was there that I went to the Russian embassy and tried in my very best ropey Russian, which I hadn't spoken for quite a long time, to explain what I wanted to do. And they just looked at me and went, "Niet." This does not fit with our criteria, I think was their phrase.
Yes. Okay, well, let's just bring up a map now and bring up a globe, and you can talk us through the journey now. I'm just going to spotlight you. So you'll be visible to everybody when you're telling this story. So we've got the globe, and it's got the points on the map where you indicate. You sent me a list very kindly of the different places that you'd visit. So let's just go through this journey. So your journey began in Kulmstock. Just talk us through the kind of kit that you had. This was some preparation that you'd done.
Yeah, well, I was renting out the house, so I'd spent most of the month trying to sort that out and empty it out. And then I looked at what I had left to take with me, and it didn't seem a great deal. Everything was more or less new because I didn't have panniers before I went, and I had to buy a new tent because it had to be smaller than the ones I'd usually camp with. And I just took the absolute bare minimum. I literally took spares for the bike, 2 pairs of shorts, 2 pairs of, 2 shirts, 1 pair of trousers to cycle in, 1 pair to wear off the bike. And then when I finally finished packing, I looked at my panniers and realized that one of the main ones was still half empty. So the only thing I could think to put in was a ½ litre of whiskey. And I tell you what, that did me good stead in France.
Well, yeah, I can certainly imagine. So if we zoom into this map, then we can track your journey. So here we are in Kulmstock, and then you cycled east, as you say, to Portsmouth. And presumably you caught a ferry from Portsmouth.
Yeah, I cycled to Weymouth the first night, which was a bit of a mammoth attempt for a first day. I cycled with my great friend Becky, who joined me for the first week. And in Portsmouth, I met up with my other fantastic friend Frankie and 4 other friends, and we caught the overnight ferry to Portsmouth. Needless to say, there was a bit of celebrating on board. So when we arrived at Caen at 6 o'clock the next morning, we weren't probably on best form, and the first thing we managed to do was cycle the wrong way up the slipway onto a motorway, and wondered why all the French were busy hooting and waving at us. But anyway, we got over that little hitch, and we spent the next few days cycling to Paris, which was where I said goodbye to all the rest of the girls and promptly started heading west out of Paris by mistake, realised my mistake, turned around and headed out along the Canal de Meaux and headed out east.
So here you are in Paris. So who is the lady with you on this picture?
This is Frankie, who's my great friend. She's a fellow physio, and I used to lodge with her when I was working up in Wales, and she decided that she'd come and join me and cycle as far as Paris, but unfortunately that was all the time she had, so I had to wave her off on the Eurostar as she headed back again.
Right. And this was in 2010, you say?
Yeah, 2010.
Yeah. So you then cycled east, and the next spot that you mentioned to me on the map was Prague. So any memories of Prague?
Yeah, well, my main memory was how busy it was, because I first went there when I was backpacking with my friend in '92, and you could wander around the city fairly freely. When I arrived there, I got to the central square. I've forgotten its name. Is it St. Wenceslas Square, I think?
Oh, yes.
And I literally couldn't get through with my bike. There were so many people all standing watching the clock, and it was chaos. But I camped on a lovely little island in the middle of the river there, and but I'd basically gone that route because I wanted to avoid all the mountains, because I'd never really cycled up a mountain before. So it was from Prague onwards that I started to hit a few of the hills, I think.
Right. So you cycled from Prague across the Czech Republic and into across Poland. Unfortunately, because of the way Google Earth maps work, so these are all in straight lines. So presumably you weren't cycling in a straight line. You were going from different places. And you also mentioned Lviv. What can you tell me about Lviv? You've got a picture that you sent me.
Yeah, Lviv was a place that stuck in my mind, partly because that was where I first asked about applying for a Russian visa, where it's still a definite no. But also, as you can see from the photos, the roads were shocking. As I cycled into Lviv, it was still absolutely torrential rain. The sides of the roads just didn't exist. They just crumbled into nothing. The potholes were so full of water, you couldn't tell whether it was just a small puddle or a 6 foot deep pothole. And there were huge lorries crashing past me, and then there were cobbles. And then when you got into the city, there were speed humps amongst that sort of road and the cobbles, and then there were tram tracks as well. And I just remember the nightmare of getting into Lviv. But I stayed there a couple of days trying to see if I could, get my Russian visa. And all of a sudden the sun came out. And from then on, I don't think I saw rain until somewhere in the southeast of China. So it was incredible. 6 weeks of rain, and then the sun came out.
Wow, you were blessed. So did you cycle? Did you say you cycled through Moldova?
I did, and Moldova was fascinating because, to be honest, it was one of those places I wasn't even quite sure where it was, like so many people, I think. And I got to Chisinau, and on the way down there, I met this wonderful family who literally stopped on the side of the road to flag me down, and they'd lived in Dublin for a few years, and they were just absolutely fascinated by this single female pedaling along on her own, and they invited me to stay with them, and they were just wonderful hosts. But in Chisinau, everyone has said to me, whatever you do, don't go through Transnistria. But the trouble is, nobody knows where Transnistria is because it's not recognized as a country. So it wasn't actually on any map. So as I set out of Chisinau, I was thinking, I hope I don't go through it, but I had absolutely no idea where it was. As it turned out, I managed to just about skirt around the edges.
Well, is that where they have, they have problems with not terrorists, but it's a kind of, it's a forbidden area.
It's very much a rebellious state. They declare their own independence, and they're not recognised by anybody except Russia, I think it is, and they don't really take particularly kindly to foreigners, as far as I can gather. But yes, anyway, I managed to avoid them and arrived successfully in Odessa, which was a pleasure.
Yes. Well, I have a friend who's a Moldovan that I met in the 1990s. She was involved in a European project, and I remember her telling me that even back in the sort of late 1990s, they didn't have television broadcast 24 hours a day. Television started something like 5 o'clock in the afternoon and finished at 11 o'clock at night because of the power difficulties. And I don't know whether you've ever heard of the book Playing the Moldovans at Tennis. Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's it's a wonderful story. I highly recommend it to everybody. And one of the things that sticks in my mind about that story was when he stayed with a Moldovan family, and he made some comments about the Moldovans and dentists. And I think he said something like the Moldovans use wooden pegs for teeth, something like that, which amused me greatly. Yeah. So you then you went to Odessa, and presumably you cycled to the north of the Black Sea. So you would have gone around.
Well, no, that was where I got a bit stuck, because I was hoping to go around through the Crimea and then around the north of the Black Sea, but that was where they refused me the Russian visa, because obviously Odessa is in the Ukraine, and the Russians said no, and it was a very definite no. So in the end, I got stuck for 10 days in Odessa, waiting to catch a ferry across the Black Sea. Odessa is a beautiful city. I'd been there before in 1990, and they've done it up so much since then. It's got a magnificent opera house, and it's on the coast. It was just a beautiful place to spend 10 days. But after 10 days in the same place, I was very glad to get on a ferry, and we headed straight across the Black Sea to Batumi in Georgia.
Oh yes, yes. So here we are in Batumi. I'll zoom out a bit so you can see where it is in context in the rest of your journey. So here we are in Batumi, having caught the ferry, and then you went on from Batumi through Georgia to Tbilisi.
And Georgia was just the most amazing country. There was incredible generosity of spirit there. The people were wonderful, so hospitable. They would literally flag me down on the side of the road to give me fruit. And there was one gentleman flagged me down and gave me the most enormous watermelon. And after spending 20 minutes with me trying to strap it to my bike, I think he probably thought that wasn't such a good idea. And the picture you've got there is where I was staying. I stopped in a small town, and I had nowhere to stay, and I couldn't really camp because it was in a small town. And I got chatting to a lady at the local shop who was just wonderful, so generous. She gave me her earrings out of her own ears because it was the only thing she had to give me as a gift. It was anyway, she showed me to this little lady across the road who put me up, and the lady must have been about 90, little tiny thing with a hairnet. And before she'd even let me in the house, she insisted on scrubbing the wooden floors. But these were the facilities out the back, and the only place to wash was in the garden, which was in full sight of all the neighbours. And in the background, you can see there the toilet. And I walked in there and thought, oh my goodness, it was just a concrete floor. There was not even a hole. There was nothing, just concrete floor and 2 blocks. No hole. And I thought, oh my goodness, what am I supposed to do? And yes, luckily I didn't need to do anything more than a quick wee. So I came out, and there was the local family dog was standing outside waiting and looking excited. So I thought, I don't like to think about it.
well, yeah. I mean, the hospitality of people on your journey seemed to mirror the kind of hospitality that you experience on this trip with Chris Blakey. People with nothing, and this is something that I've observed when I've gone to conferences. Been very lucky to do a lot of traveling myself in my life, and I found when I've gone to conferences, people are so generous. They will have bought a special gift. People who have far less money than me will just have that thoughtfulness and want to share something with you. I have a friend who's headmaster of a secondary school in Kathmandu in Nepal, and just the generosity of people in these places is so amazing. So from Tbilisi, then you went on to Baku, and I've got a couple of pictures here. This one and this one. Oh yeah. So you said, I think, about Baku there was nothing. Well, I think that was the word that you.
The road to Baku, which was a previous photo you had there. Yeah, there was. It was well in excess of 40 degrees of dry heat, and as you can see, there was no shade, there was no water, there were no restaurants to stop at. It was a couple of very long, hot days of cycling. But again, people were incredible. I stopped at one place, and after fending off a few slightly over enthusiastic gentlemen, I managed to find somewhere to stay, and they put me up in a room that housed a giant combing machine for combing the cotton, and I literally sort of bedded down underneath the cotton combing machine. It was extraordinary. But
wow.
It was a very, very tough cycle ride. It was windy, it was hot, and it was just relentless. But one day, halfway along that road, some gentleman pulled up in a great big Mercedes, leaned out the window and gave me an ice cold bottle of Coke. And I hate Coca-Cola with a passion, but oh my God, it was like
like nectar. Yeah. So tell us about the story with the oil derrick and your clash with the police.
Just outside Baku, there's this area where they're mining the oil, and you see all these nodding derricks, and these featured in one of the opening sequences of one of the James Bond films. I forget which one it was now, and they're also obviously visible from the air, and they're on Google Earth and goodness knows what. But I cycled around for about an hour and a half. I got chatting to a load of the workers there who'd invited me to go and share their lunch with them, and were wonderfully generous. And then just as I was cycling off, this little police larder appeared, and they flagged me down, and they asked to have a look at my passport. So I had to give it to him to have a look at, which he immediately stuck in his pocket. And I thought, oh, this isn't going well. And then they asked to look at my photos, and they went, oh no, it's illegal to take photographs of this area because it's sensitive. And I said, have you never heard of Google Earth? You can see it. But anyway, that didn't really wash. So this one of the policemen said, right, you get in the car and I'll cycle your bike and we'll go to the police station. I went, I don't think you will. And I said, you go and I'll follow. Anyway, I've never cycled so slowly in my life. Just to annoy them, I pedaled along. We finally got to the police station and met the commander. I had to wait about 2.5 hours, and every 10 minutes a different policeman came in, and they offered me tea and sweets and cake, and they all wanted to know my story. And eventually, about 3 hours later, the commander had made me delete all of my photos, obviously, but one I managed to keep very subtly. And as I left, they said, oh, well, you could have gone hours ago, but you were such a lovely lady. We just wanted to talk to you. A long day, but no criminal record, thankfully.
No criminal record. So did you cycle then round the bottom of the Black Sea then to Ashgabat?
No, I was running not a bit short of time then, but I needed to get over the mountains into China before the snow set in. So I didn't really have the time to go all the way around. So I spent 2 weeks in Baku, which I wouldn't recommend it, to be honest, having to get all my visas for Central Asia, because it was the first place that I really needed a lot of visas for. So I managed to get all those sorted. And then I caught the ferry across the Caspian Sea to Turkmenbashi in Turkmenistan. And then headed on across to Ashgabat, which is the capital of Turkmenistan. Yeah,
and we have a picture of Ashgabat. They look like, no, I was going to say they look like telephone boxes, but on closer inspection, there are guards there.
Ashgabat is the most extraordinary city. It's not a wealthy country, but the whole of Ashgabat, the capital, is covered in, it's just dripping in glass and silver. All the street furniture is painted silver, and there's all these gold statues of the then president at the time. And some of the statues actually turned to face the sun, so that he would always be facing the sun no matter what time of day. It was an extraordinary dictatorship, it really was. And he'd written a book, the name escapes me, I'm afraid, but he'd written a book, the leader of Turkmenistan, and in order to be able to pass your driving test, you had to prove you'd read his book 3 times. It's a truly extraordinary country.
So reading his book twice is not good enough.
No, how they knew, I have no idea.
Well, I was going to say, that's extraordinary. So yeah, Turkmenistan, then Uzbekistan, and then you went to Tashkent. I'm not sure we have a picture there, or just, yes. So what's happening here?
I can't see a photo, but I think I know which one it was. That's it, yes. This was another example of absolutely extraordinary generosity and hospitality. I've been cycling all day across the desert in Uzbekistan against huge headwinds, really, really hot. I've done about 140 kilometers, and just as it was starting to get dark, I thought, oh, I'm running out of water and there's nowhere. So I saw this gentleman sitting outside his house, and he had a well beside him. Most houses had their own wells. So I went over to ask if I could get some water, and he said, oh, where are you staying tonight? And I went, you know, out there in the desert. He went, oh, no, you're not. So he dragged me in and I met the whole family. They put on an extraordinary meal. They sent the youngest son to go and get vodka. Another son was sent to go and get the DVD player so we could all watch music and dance. And after 140 kilometers across the desert that day, I had to spend about 4 hours talking, socializing, dancing, but they were the most wonderful family. And that night, where we were sitting there is all on a top chan, which is a raised tea bed, as they call it. So you sit there cross-legged and eat your meal. And in the evening, they cleared the meal and they said, there we are, that's where you can sleep. I thought, oh, thank goodness for that. I lay down absolutely exhausted. And then 2 seconds later, grandma climbed in one side beside me, the two sons the other side, and then the family cat came and sat on my head. So I spent the night with the whole family under the stars. It was an extraordinary evening.
Wow, that's amazing. So going on from there, the next place we've got on the map is Bishkek.
Yes. Oh, yes. So I went from Uzbekistan. I went through into Kyrgyzstan. I spent a few days in Bishkek, which is the capital. And then for the first time, I headed up into the mountains. So over my first, I think it was about 3,500 meter pass, which actually isn't as bad as it sounds, because by then, obviously, I was quite a lot fitter than when I started out. And the roads are very, very sinuous and they sort of wind gently up the mountains. At the top of the mountain, I went through the most hideous tunnel, which was about 2.5 kilometers long. And shortly afterwards, I discovered that about 20 people had died there a couple of years before because there'd been an accident and all the lorry drivers had just sat in the queue in the tunnel with their engines running and people had died of suffocation. But anyway, they now put extractor fans in this. But I came out the other side onto this amazing Suzumir Valley, which is a huge flat valley high up in the mountains. And everything there is about the horse. The place is covered in yurts because the women and children come up during the summer and live up there to look after the horses and any other animals they have. And so I stayed a couple of nights in yurts with local families who invited me in. And at this particular one, the young girl showed me how to milk a horse, which is something, most of us hadn't done before. But the trouble was she was so scared of the camera, she wouldn't take a photo of me doing it.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, well, that's an experience that I haven't had, and I don't think I'm very likely to have in my lifetime. So moving on from there, you went to Kashgar, and then we now find ourselves in China, Lanzhou.
Yes. So I crossed from Kyrgyzstan. I went across to Kashgar, where I spent my 40th birthday, but luckily with a group of fellow cyclists that I'd met at various points along the way. And it was quite a crossroads, Kashgar. Some people were heading south down the Karakoram highway and others were heading east into China. And there was two choices then. The Taklamakan Desert takes up a large chunk of Xinjiang. And you could go the southern route, which had no tarmac, and really I didn't feel I wanted to risk on my own. Or I took a very long, boring cycle ride around the north of the Taklamakan Desert. And as you can see, the local wildlife was very much involved.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. I hadn't noticed before that your bike is on there as well, just passing the
just pedaling past the camels.
Yes. Oh, just an occupational hazard. And tell me about this picture with the monks.
Yeah, from there I went across to Lanzhou and then down to Sichuan, down through Sichuan and down through Chengdu. And then I decided I hadn't really seen much of the mountains yet, so I decided to go west for the first time on my trip and climb right up into the mountains. It was quite relentless. Every day you climb 2,000 meters, which would take you up to well above 4,000 meters, and then you go straight over the pass and down the other side. And I did this for about 2 weeks, I think, and eventually came to Shahe. I couldn't go into Tibet at the time because they wouldn't issue visas to solo travelers, especially ones on bicycles. So Shahe was the nearest I could get, and it was there that they had the largest Tibetan monastery outside of Tibet itself. And it was just quite an extraordinary place, watching all the pilgrims who came and were prostrating themselves for 2 kilometers all the way up to the monastery. And you could walk around the outer Kora where you had to spin every single one of the prayer wheels as you went.
Wow.
And it was an amazing experience. The nearest I'd ever been to Tibet.
So you went then traveling east again, further east. Did you go through Myanmar or Burma as it was
No,
then?
again, I couldn't get a visa for Burma, so I went down through the mountains and down into Laos, where I'd arranged to meet my sister, who was coming out to join me for a couple of weeks. So I had a couple of weeks of literally cycling from freezing cold temperatures up in the high mountains, all the way. I called it cycling back to summer, because every few hours it got warmer and warmer, and before you knew it, you were back amongst the bananas and the tropics. So I went down to Laos and I met my sister in Vientiane. I left my bike in Luang Prabang then, because she'd just come out to visit. So I left my bike there and we spent a couple of weeks traveling together, went on through to Vietnam. And then in Vietnam, I met up with another friend who'd come out to visit for a couple of weeks. And then by then we'd gone through Christmas and New Year. They all went home, and in the new year of 2011, it was by now, I set off back into a very cold, damp, miserable southeastern China.
Yeah, so you were cycling
one of the low
round,
points of the trip, I think.
You were cycling then, so via, did you go to Hanoi, round through that way up to Hong Kong?
Yeah, went up from Hanoi, and literally, as you look at the map there, sort of if you go straight up, I went straight across the border there and into southeast China, which is, yeah, it was a tough time to be there. There's a lot of coal mining in that area, so at the end of each day, my face would be black from the dust, and it was cold and damp, and the rooms you stayed in were a bit miserable. So I think having just seen family and friends out as well, it was a point where it was quite tricky. But then I got to Hong Kong, and my friend Frankie, who you saw in Paris there, came out to join me for a holiday. And I stayed with friends of friends and had a wonderful 10-day respite there. Managed to replenish my underwear supply for the first time in nearly a year. And after all those months in China, I finally got to eat cheese, because the Chinese don't do dairy products. They don't do dairy or coffee or bread. So I was delighted to get there and just eat bread and cheese and drink coffee.
Oh, right. Okay. So from there you went on to Shanghai.
Yep, so I went all the way up round, didn't go through Wuhan, funnily enough. I did have to check when all this erupted last year whether I'd been to Wuhan or not, because a lot of the Chinese cities are remarkably similar. And again, there were some extraordinary places along the way. There were these beautiful round houses at Zhongding. But then I went up to Shanghai, spent a couple of days there, and then pedaled on up to Beijing. I got to Beijing exactly a year after I left, which was the 29th of April 2011, and it happened to be the day that of the royal wedding, when William and Kate got married.
Oh yes, yeah.
And I stayed with friends and friends there. It's quite extraordinary. They were an expat family, so with English children who've never even heard of the Queen, let alone William and Kate. But we sat and watched the royal wedding anyway, so that was an interesting moment.
So from Beijing, then we then traveling further north, and this was a flight that you took, presumably, to.
Yes, because my original plan had been to go on to South Korea by boat, because you can't get through North Korea, obviously, and then I was going to go to Japan, but my lack of planning actually paid off, because the tsunami happened in March 2011, and I just decided that it wasn't a time where they really needed tourists in Japan at that moment. So I got to Beijing and thought, oh, what am I going to do now? Because my original plan had been to go on to Vancouver by ship. And I happened to be outside the Bird's Nest, the Olympic Stadium in Beijing, and I looked at a map of the world and I thought, well, if I'm going to do the Americas, I might as well do all of it. So I flew up to Anchorage.
Here we are in Anchorage, and there's your bear protection kit.
Yes, in Anchorage again, I stayed with friends of friends, and he happened to be a bike mechanic, which was great. So he gave my bike a good old once over. And the couple I stayed with were very intense church goers, and I went to their church with them and things. And everyone was shocked that I wasn't carrying a gun. And they said, "What are you going to do if you meet the bears?" And I thought, I don't know. So in the end, they persuaded me to buy at least some bear spray. So the one in the middle there is bear spray, which cost an absolute fortune and I never used. And the other two were for Dutch courage, just in case I came across a bear.
Right. And there we are.
And I did, yes. Came across plenty. In fact, the very first ones I saw were young bears that had climbed up a tree right next to the road. So I stopped to have a look at them. And as soon as they heard my cleat click on my pedal, they started shimmying down the tree. And I've never cycled so fast in my life.
They thought perhaps breakfast had arrived, or lunch or dinner. So now you then went on to Vancouver.
Yeah, so I spent 6 weeks literally cycling down the west coast of Oh, sorry, it's not a bit. Yes, so 6 weeks cycling down the west coast of Alaska and then down through Canada. Most stunning scenery. And after all the dirt and the pollution and the overpopulation in China, to be cycling down through Alaska was absolutely stunning. Literally a breath of fresh air. But I got down to Vancouver, and there I had another little break. My parents came out to visit, so I left my bike in a hotel there, and we spent 3 weeks doing a little trip around. And then from Vancouver, which I think is upside down, I then headed on down into the States.
Yeah. So you went to Seattle, and then carrying on the journey, you went to San Francisco.
Yeah, so I decided you can do different routes down the States. You can go down through the center, you can go down the Great Divide, or you can go down the right down the west coast. And I literally stayed on the coast all the way down. Oregon is the most beautiful state I've come across. Washington was lovely, but you couldn't get to the coast because everybody builds houses right on the coast, the rich people do. So you didn't really get to see the sea very much. In Oregon, it's forbidden to build a private house right on the coast. And so the views are stunning, the beaches are amazing, but I must say the water is pretty cold. I hadn't realized, I hadn't learned about the Humboldt Current at that time. And yeah.
Oh, so you were doing some
might look at appealing, but it was.
You were doing some swimming as well, were you, on your trip?
Well, I tried. I saw the ocean, I dropped the bike, I ran down to the beach, got my feet into the water and ran straight back out again. It was absolutely Baltic. But yes, I carried on down then through down through California, where you see the redwoods were stunning, and that picture there before was of drive-through tree. I had to do about 15 takes because it was a self-timer that only had 10 seconds and there was nobody about to take a photo. Right. One of the joys or difficulties of traveling on your own is there's no one to take photos of you, which is why I have an awful lot of pictures of my bike and not many of me actually on it. And then I carried on down to San Francisco, which is one of my favorite cities, just loved it. And cycling over the Golden Gate Bridge is something I'll just never ever forget. It was a proper special moment, beautiful. Yeah,
absolutely stunning. So then Los Angeles, and then down to San Diego. See if we have any pictures there.
Yeah, so I went through Los Angeles, which, yeah, Los Angeles is not very friendly to travelers. You can't camp rough anywhere. You can't even camp with a tent on campsites because they've got an obsession about homeless people. So you can go there with a massive RV, you know, there are great big recreational vehicles, but you can't just stop with the tent. So I had a bit of a nightmare around that area. Got out of Los Angeles quite quick. And then got down to San Diego, and it was in San Diego that I met up again with a lovely American lady who I'd met a bit further up the coast, and she was on a 2-day cycling trip on her own, and she met me, and she was planning to go off to Hawaii for her 50th birthday. And when she met me, 2 weeks later, I got this message, can I come cycling with you for my 50th? So she joined me to cycle down through Baja California, which for a first cycle trip on her part was quite a challenge.
Yes, I can imagine. Well, I've turned the map the right way round now, so they're probably more recognizable. Yeah, Baja California. Is it in California or is it in Mexico?
No, Baja California is actually Mexico. Yeah, Baja means south, and yeah, it's the most beautiful peninsula. You've got dolphins and whales, and the cacti, as you can see, are quite on the large side. It's real proper desert as you imagine it from, you know, you think back to all those cartoons you saw as a kid. This is a sort of desert that you were looking at. It was absolutely beautiful. But I cycled down through there with Marcy, but again, it was very hot. And we met up with a crazy Mexican who was, well, and still is all these years later, still cycling around with his guitar. It was lovely to spend a couple of weeks with 2 others for once, camping, raft, swimming in the beaches, just, yeah, beautiful part of the world.
Right. And did you get to visit any hostelries or pubs in this, you know, which form part of your early motivation for cycling?
Probably not so many hostelries, but we drank an awful lot of tequila. The lady Marcy that I was traveling with, she's a great fan of the local libations as well. So I think we used to get through a better part of a bottle of tequila every couple of days. But if you're going to do it, Mexico's the place to do it. And the food in Mexico is great as well. I love it. So I got down to the south of Baja California and I spent an extra week there doing a Spanish course. because my Spanish was almost non-existent, and stayed with the lovely local family while I was doing that. And then I sailed straight across the Gulf of California there to Mazatlan, and then headed all down the west coast of Mexico. I've been to Mexico before, so I'd seen a lot of the big sites and the beautiful cities in the interior, and I'd been to the Yucatan, which was lucky because the west coast probably has less excitement than the rest of the country, and it is long. I think it's about 4,000 kilometers, so it was just cycling day after day, and by now it was really hot, really humid, to the point where my hand used to slip when I was trying to change gear, because it's a twist grip gear, and it was yes, it was a long, hot, sweaty ride down Mexico.
And from there, you find yourself now, where are we here, in Panama City. How did you get to Panama City?
Yeah, not quite in that direction. I went down through, right down through Mexico. America there, straight down through Central America.
Oh, right, okay. Right, yeah. Yes, the audio's gone a little bit. I think we're trying to be a bit ambitious with the map, so
the next, stuttering a bit.
Yeah, the next one that I have is Panama City, and then after that, on your itinerary, we have Cuba.
Meet a friend for a couple of weeks, and we spent New Year there in Havana and cycle around Cuba with Linda. And then from there, I flew down to Cartagena in Colombia. And from Colombia, I headed on down. From there, I headed on down through Colombia. Oh, I've just got a nice picture of Facebook. I don't know what anyone else can see. David, you're on mute, I think. David, you're on mute.
Yes, I've unmuted myself.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, sorry, I unmuted myself, and you just bear with me. I lost my connection for a little while, so if I go back to the Google Earth map, can you see the map now, Jude?
Oh, not yet. Oh, yes, there we go. Yeah. While you were gone, I got several messages saying just keep talking, so I did. So I've got us down now. Flew from Cuba, where I spent a couple of weeks with my friend Linda, and then went down to Cartagena in Colombia, and then cycled down. Colombia again is one of those countries that people tend to think, oh, there's trouble there and there's always going to be problems, but they were the most beautiful people. And it was there in Colombia that I had my first serious crash as well. I was stopping in this small town I saw a restaurant, and I was about to pull across the road, and I can't actually see really much out my left eye. So bearing in mind you're cycling on the right, I stopped and had a good look behind me. There was nothing coming, so I pulled across the road, and this motorbike came out of nowhere and just blindsided me. My bags went everywhere, and I over the handlebars, and I thought I'd broken my ribs. And anyway, people came to pick me up, and I was going, wait a minute, just let me see if I'm injured. They started picking up all my bags, and I thought, oh my God, they're going to steal everything. But what they did was they picked up all my bags and put them in the local taxi office for safekeeping. They picked me up. We looked at my bike and realized that the handlebar stem was broken, and they immediately took me off to a bike shop around the corner. And in 20 minutes, $10 it cost me. They had the whole thing fixed, the bike put back together, and they bought me lunch in the local restaurant. And when I cycled out the next day, I met somebody who told me that was one of the worst drug running towns in Colombia, and you should never, ever, ever stop there. So I just like to dispute what people tell you.
Well, you got away with that one then, by the sounds of it. So the journey then continues to. We've got a picture for Cully. Yeah, is this the repairing of the bike?
Yes, that was, a little bit further north than Cali, but that was the gentleman who, they had the exact right piece that they needed. I couldn't believe it. I thought my journey would be over, because literally with a handlebar stem broken, you don't carry a spare of those. But they had exactly the right part, and they put it all back together, and I was on my way. And $10. It was amazing.
Well, so, and then carrying on down from there, I got Quito as there. Is that from Quito?
Yeah, that's right. So I carried on down, went to Quito, which is very, very high in Ecuador, and then carried on down, and there was crossing the equator. Now, most people cross the equator in that area. There's a main road, and there's a big park there. I can't remember what it's called, but it's where everybody goes to. It's like a theme park on the equator. But I happened to be on a little back road, and that particular globe was surrounded by a little piece of grass with a lot of dog poo and a little man who was tending the area. So luckily I got my photo taken by him. So that was me crossing the equator by land for the first time, I think, because yes, most of my other trips across the equator have been by boat or by air.
Yeah. And then moving down from there, you went to Lima.
Yeah, went down to Lima, met some fantastic people traveling through Peru. There's a particular guy I must mention called Lucho, who is famous amongst the cycling fraternity. He has a Casa de Ciclistas, and he hosts traveling cyclists and has hosted more than 3,000 over the years. And he is just the most amazing guy. And at the time, he didn't even cycle himself, not touring cycling. He did road cycling, but he's since done a lot more touring cycling. And he joined me and cycled down to Lima. It was great. It was just great to have somebody local to show me the area and to get to know. So that was brilliant. And then from there, I went on from Lima up over the mountains. Then again, it was just before, it was that journey that I got bitten by a dog, which was a bit of a nuisance because I had to stop and get boosters for my rabies jabs. And then I cycled on up over the mountains again to La Paz in Bolivia, where again, as you can see, there was quite a lot of nothing on the roads.
Yes, I can see that. And then carry on further because I'm just conscious of time, but I don't want to rush things. I'm quite happy for it to go beyond the hour. And I'm sure those people who are listening to us were so fascinated by the story that they'll want to stay as well. I've never heard of a place called Juju.
Jujuy, I think it is. I'm not quite sure. Yes, Jujuy. So I went from La Paz. La Paz was very, very high then. You were about 4,500 meters all day, every day. Again, beautiful people in Bolivia, but very, very shy, quite difficult to get to know them. But they would all come out and watch whenever I pitched my tent. And then I went on down into Argentina, so acrossed the border and went down through San Juan de Jujuy and down through this most incredible gorges where the rocks are rainbow colored. It's just a stunning part of the country, down to Salta, and then headed down through the wine regions, which suited me very nicely, I must say. Headed down to Mendoza, and then from Mendoza to get over to Santiago, there's a very, very large pass where I got stuck for a couple of days because there'd been so much snowfall, nobody could pass. And that was the descent the other side. That was a cycle ride. And again, I went from snow to the tropics in a space of about 2 hours. It was incredible.
Wow.
So I got down there to Valparaiso, which is on the coast, which is one of the most beautiful cities I've been to. It's built up a very steep hill right on the edge of the cliff, beautiful colors. And then I cycled back to Santiago. And by this point, it was June, 2012. I promised my family that I'd be back for a big family celebration they were having to celebrate what would have been my granddad's 100th birthday, even though he died 23 years before, but that's a technicality. And also for the start of the London Olympics. And also you couldn't carry on further south at that time because the weather was coming in, it was winter, and a lot of the road that goes south needs boats to get down there, and they all stop for the winter. So I went to Easter Island for a week while I was waiting, and then I caught a flight back to Madrid because I couldn't quite face the thought of going straight to Heathrow and being back in the melee of UK. So I flew to Madrid, and then I pedaled my way up over the Pyrenees, up the west coast of France to San Malo, and then went across on the ferry back to Guernsey to see my family on the way home.
And there you are. You had a big welcome sign waiting for you. Welcome back, Judi.
Yes, my dad does like to do things. He likes to make a statement. So yes, that was his statement banner. And those are my two nieces, Ella and Rosa. And while I was away, my third niece Poppy was born. And so it was, it was great to be back. And we had a big family gathering of all the Norman clan, which is my maiden name. And I was there for about a week, watched the opening of the Olympics, and then I took the ferry back across to Portsmouth and cycled back to Comstock to arrive on the 5th of August 2012.
And there you are. And there you are back again. Well, just as you started in Europe, you had all that rain in Europe, and so you finished the way that you started. Well, Judi, I could listen to you for hours. You got such a fascinating story, and I'm so happy that you're able to share it with us. I'm just looking at the Q&A. There's a question from Neil Rushton. did you ever fear for your life?
I did, but it was only because of the traffic, never because of the people. I often thought I was going to die. In fact, after I did this trip, I went back 2 years later. I went back to Santiago again to do that bit I missed at the bottom. And I cycled down to Ushuaia, had 2 amazing weeks in Antarctica on a ship, and then flew up to Buenos Aires and cycled up to Rio. The very last day of that cycling into Rio, I was convinced I was going to die. Absolutely convinced. The buses were out to kill me. So
Right.
yes, those were always the moments. It was always the track. That's why I didn't have a rear view mirror on my bike, because I would have died of a heart attack 100 times a day. So sometimes it's best not to know what's coming at you.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, Judi, you know, it's fantastic having the opportunity to talk to you. A fascinating story. I'm sorry for the technical problems that we had the way through there, but you did well to carry on. I'll see what I can do to salvage that part of the recording. But I hope that it's still going out live on Facebook, because they would still have been able to have watched you. So I also want to thank our participants for joining us today. I'm just going to have a look at the list of names to see if there's anybody that I recognise from there, just to say hello. They're probably all friends of yours, actually.
I think they might be. I can't see who's on there, but yeah, I think Facebook is an amazing thing.
It is. Well, I'll read their names out. There's Ali Bisson, Emma Curtis, Frankie Norfield. Is that the Frankie you're talking about? She's there. Gemma M, Jamie Smith, Karen Blanchford, Mark Farrell, Neil Rushton, Roger Hooton, and Sue Farrell.
Yep, all friends.
They're all friends of
all
yours.
Family. Yeah.
Friends or family. This story will go to a wider audience when I publish the recording. And just for those who are watching, if you're interested, tomorrow I'm going to be interviewing a guy called Robert Swan, who's walked to both the South Pole and the North Pole. So he's an adventurer on foot rather than being on cycle. Again, he's got an amazing story, and he'll be joined by a friend of mine called Joe Little, who accompanied him on one of these trips. So we were able to share some fantastic pictures taken from the North and South Pole and Antarctica when Robert was doing his last trip. So Judi, much appreciated. Thank you for joining me.
David, can I just make one last comment?
Because yeah, please.
The reason behind your presentations you're doing and the interviews you're doing is to inspire young people. And having heard the list there, they're probably not all that young. But I just wanted to make one last comment. And when I came back from my trip, I did a talk at the local secondary school. And I talked to children, 120 children, I think, who were about the age of 13 or 14. And the thing that really stuck with me was at the end of the talk, one of the kids stood up and said, do you know, he said, you're not rich, you're not famous, you're not, you know what, you're not on telly. You're just a lady from down the road, and we drive past your house every day on the school bus. And I went, yes, that is exactly the point. The whole point is you don't have to be rich or famous or followed by a BBC film camera. You just get out there and do it.
Yeah, well, I think that's a wonderful note to finish on, because I've had very similar experiences, and many of the extraordinary people that I've met, no one has ever heard of them, but they not only made a difference in my life. When I've told their story to other people, they've made a difference to lives of people that they've never met and will never be likely to meet. And I'm sure your story will inspire people the same. I'm hoping that all of the archives that I am saving, the maps of the journeys, will be accessed by the school kids. So not only can they be inspired, they also have a little bit of education as well about journeys and what life is like outside of lockdown. So thanks again, Judi. I'm going to draw this to a close now.